Today we're going to be talking about things that you may be doing that have the potential to ruin your mixes. I believe there is only one fundamental flaw that we have the potential to make, and I'm going to break this down into 3 questions/points that you can ask yourself to help keep you on track when you're working on a mix. The next question we can ask ourselves to help avoid mixing mistakes is, am I making panic moves? And by panic moves, I refer to moves that are based out of fear or moves that lack a plan or lack intentionality. And I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing, but I was told I should be doing this, so I'm doing it anyway. Let's hop inside the DAW, and I'm going to show you a few examples of how you can avoid panic moves and what some typical panic moves might be.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. What's the procedure? Stay calm! Wait.
Okay, I like to consider this tip the EQ speaker quadrant tip. Horrible name because I have not thought it through until this exact second when it's coming out of my mouth. But here's what I want you to think of. I have a Q3 pulled up, and you see a line stretching across it right here, this yellow line. Now imagine that line was a piece of tape that we stretched from the center of our left speaker to the center of our right. So it's creating this line running right across the front of our speakers. Now we can use different sections, different frequency areas to manipulate the proximity of a sound source to that piece of tape. So when you're thinking of EQ, I want you to think of EQ in terms of up, down, front to back. Okay, so I've cooked up some examples here for you to highlight the quadrant and how we can move things around. And the first one we're going to look at is down. Now, down starts with anything around 0 hertz. I mean, most likely 20, because that's really where we can start to hear some rumble, up to 150. When we're working with that frequency area, that's mainly an area where we hear a lot of sustain, but also it's going to make the sound source feel like it's below the tape, like closing towards the floor. I've level matched this EQ, and we're going to bring it in and out, and I have it on the bass drum. When I hit play here, the EQ is not going to be in, so the bass drum essentially is going to be flat in regards to how it was recorded and how it's supposed to sit in the mix. And listen to its relationship height-wise to, say, the vocal. They're going to feel like they're basically occupying the same space, like the vocal and the kick drum are the same height. So here we go. So that kick drum feels literally like it's punching right through the center of the vocal. We're going to kick this EQ on. I've boosted a bunch of our down frequencies. So basically this whole area up to about 150. And let's take notice of how it shifts the bass drum in terms of height. What you should hear when this EQ kicks on is the bass drum now falls below the vocal. Again, if you are looking for ways to create space in your mix and you feel that your drums and your vocal are fighting each other, these are absolute areas to start looking at. Let's now move on to our next quadrant, which I queued up on the piano here. So let's listen to the piano in solo for a second so you can latch onto it with your ear. So it's got some reverb baked in. So already we're going to get a little bit of a sense of depth and distance. However, this quadrant that we're talking about is between basically 150 hertz and 500. I have it peaked up here so that we're kind of really peaking around 500. And these are our low mids. And the way that we hear the 150 hertz to 500 is back. The sound is going to shift from maybe in front of the tape, on the tape, to back, almost behind your speakers. So this is going to be a great way to shift something back in your mix without having to use compression. So for example, we're going to play it. I'm going to crank this up a little higher so that you can really hear the piano through the density of the mix. And then when we kick that EQ on, watch how it shifts back. That one was really easy to hear, right? Once we put that EQ on where we're boosting the 500, the 150 to 500 area, we pushed that piano back and created some separation between the piano and the vocal where it's not punching through the mix as much anymore. Okay, so now with that in tow, let's move on to our third quadrant. The third quadrant is going to be the 500 area to the 2K area. That we're basically getting into our mids and our mid highs. Now, where our first two quadrants focused mainly on sustain, this quadrant is one where we now start focusing on transient information. And transients, bright transients, move things forward. So this quadrant right here, 500 to 2K, is going to be right on that tape. It's going to keep things right in line with the speakers, not jumping out at us, but it's going to hold things in the mix. So let's listen to the acoustic for a second, just in solo. So when you really have those frequencies accentuated, it starts to take on a little bit of a phone filter kind of. But let's listen in the mix. And what we're going to notice is the guitar should come forward just a little bit. Now, all these EQs are level matched. So we don't have to worry about really getting any false level bumps from volume. So here we go. Let's listen to the acoustic. I'm going to boost the acoustic up a little bit so you can really hear it. So you can see when we were working with the 500 to 2K area, which is an area that our human hearing hears really, really well, that it helps to pull things forward in the mix. And that acoustic guitar, when we engaged that quadrant, brought things forward because it helped make the transient information inside the acoustic guitar more intelligible. So bright transients help to push things forward in a mix. So if you are working on something and you feel like it's trapped in your speakers or you feel like it's not coming forward and you're not getting the results you want by volume rides, make sure you check out the third quadrant, which is the 500 to 2K area. The next quadrant we're going to look at is going to be the 2K to 6K area. Now, again, let's imagine that tape going across, and the 2K to 6K area is going to pull things in front of the tape. It's going to make things feel like they're coming out into the room, that they are in front of the speakers, which is something really, really great to know, especially when you're searching around and looking for a way to kind of free something from a speaker and get it out into the room. Looking at that 2 to 6K area is an absolute must in terms of a starting spot. So we put this on the vocal, and let's listen to the vocal in the mix without this in, and then we'll pop the EQ on and notice how the vocal is going to feel like it comes forward a little bit more. And also, you're going to notice that the timbre of the vocal changes a little bit, and that's going to be natural when you're kind of really just cranking up one, general kind of frequency area. So I'm going to pop on the vocal, hold in your mind where this vocal is fixed in relationship to that tape stretching across the speakers. And then when we pop on this EQ, notice whether or not you feel the vocal steps forward. So you can hear the vocal step forward, and the vocal feels like it crossed that line. It feels like it's out in front of the speakers now rather than trapped in the speaker. And that's just by boosting the 2 to 6K quadrant area, helps to move things forward a little bit and also make it more transient. So what you kind of did notice was you were getting a little bit more bite in the vocal as well. And now we have our last quadrant, and that is 6K and above. And we hear that as air. That is up. So essentially, the sound lifts. And one area we can look at that on is, say, for example, these hats. So let's listen to these hats. I'm going to pop the EQ on and notice how all of a sudden the hi-hats feel like they are higher. Now let's listen to that in the mix. Using the vocal, again, as a point of reference, notice when the EQ is not right in the face of the vocal. And then notice when we put the EQ in that the hat lifts above the vocal. Really cool, right? So I would love for you to start thinking of EQ in terms of the quadrants. And again, our first quadrant is the 20 hertz to 150, which we hear is down. Our second quadrant is 150 to 500 that we kind of hear back. Our third quadrant is 500 to 2K that we kind of hear right in line with the front of our speakers. Our next quadrant is 2 to 6K, which we hear in front of the speakers. And then we get 6K and above, and we start hearing that as air, as lift, as being above the speakers. The next EQ mistake that I see a lot is in fear, that everything we do has to be these micro moves. But some of the coolest advice I hear is if we're just looking at this simple channel strip, for example, they go to 15 for a reason.
These go to 11.
If we're only supposed to, boost or cut things just a dB and a half here or there, well, then we wouldn't need wide ranges like this. And sometimes some of the coolest things you can do are being bold with your EQ. So never hesitate and be fearful of pushing, because you can always pull back. The best part of the pencil sometimes is the eraser. But a lot of times we get too afraid. We're afraid other engineers are going to look at this and say, oh my God, what are you doing? This makes no sense. And we make these conservative moves. And when you just stack up a bunch of conservative moves through a mix, what do you get? You get a conservative mix. And, that can translate to being boring. So don't be afraid to have some fun and, blow some sound sources up, push some EQ, make bold choices. What do they say? No risk it, no biscuit. Go out and get that biscuit, push that thing, dime that thing to 15 and see what happens. It doesn't work, take it off. Now, the opposite of the be bold and boost daylights out of everything is what people call spaghetti EQs. And this would be an example of a spaghetti EQ, where you have all these little kind of slivers and gashes through an entire frequency spectrum of an instrument source. In no way, shape, or form am I going to say that doing this is doing anything harmful to your mix, especially if you did it with intentionality. Because if you did, you would need to phone Sean Everett, who I think is a brilliant mix engineer, and tell him that he's doing nothing but messing his mixes up. And he seems to be such a humble guy. Maybe he'll actually entertain the phone call and think about it. But I've, seen mixes by Sean Everett where he has, multiple EQs like this stacked up on his, master bus or on a particular instrument source. And what makes this effective or makes it something destructive is the intentionality behind it. So all I'm going to say is don't fear an EQ like this if this happens to be an EQ on a sound source for you, but ask yourself, do I hear everything here? Or was I told to go and notch out, 1700 and go and cut, 93 point whatever, and to put my biggest cut at, 1019? If you're doing that and you're just following a recipe, then there's a good chance you could be just carving up a sound source to where it no longer sounds natural. But if you are listening to your sound source and in the context of a mix, you keep finding yourself going back to an EQ that's on a particular instrument and notching something else out and notching something else out, well, I will be the last person on the planet to tell you that you are some kind of noob and what you are doing is for clowns, because I am vehemently against that kind of mentality. As long as you are hearing this and as long as these moves are intentional, never, ever, ever fear, bold EQ moves or, a bunch of spaghetti stuff. Now, what I would advise you against when you're doing something like this is don't do this in solo. Everything sounds bad in solo. I mean, for example, we'll solo the snare drum. I will solo this band. Oh, yeah, that sounds horrible. I gotta cut that. Well, how about this? Oh, that sounds horrible. I gotta cut that. Oh, that sounds horrible. I gotta cut that. Oh, that sounds horrible. I got to cut that. You get the point, right? Don't do it in solo. And if you're looking for just a general rule of thumb when it comes to EQ, here's what I'm going to tell you. Boost wide, cut narrow. Think of it like that. Find if there's little frequency pockets you don't like, cut them. If there are general areas you're looking to sweeten, do that, but do that a little wider. That will usually help hold the sound together better than if you do massive, wide cuts and very, very notched boosts. You could start to get some really funky artifacts.